The apples were warm in my hands, their skin slightly waxy, their scent rising with a soft sweetness. I sliced carefully the way I always had, thumb tucked, blade steady, motion smooth. Cinnamon floated in the air, mingling with the faint clink of dishes and the soft laughter of children in the next room. The sunlight reached across the counter like it remembered where I used to stand. Everything felt peaceful, like it might stay good for once. Then Amanda's voice came from behind. Me. She's not dangerous. Just senile. It wasn't loud, not meant for me, but it found me anyway. The word dropped like a pebble into still water, and all my calm rippled away. I didn't flinch outwardly, not a twitch, but something inside, something steady, bent a little. My hands didn't stop moving. I finished the slice, laid the wedge beside the others. But the knife felt heavier, like it knew something I hadn't wanted to admit. No one turned. No one noticed. I looked at the apple in my palm. It had split clean down the middle, its flesh pale, exposed. I pressed the halves together gently, as if I could undo the cut. I didn't drop the knife. I didn't cry. I just stood there, feeling something shift, like a painting askew on the wall, slight, but impossible to ignore once you saw it. Birds chirped outside. A spoon clinked in a bowl. The kitchen stayed warm. But the air around me felt colder somehow. Amanda chuckled, light and breathy, like she'd just told a harmless joke. "I'm kidding," she added, not even glancing my way. Her smile followed the sound, tight, controlled, practiced. It was the kind of smile that says everything's fine while cutting you anyway. I knew that smile. Wore it once myself when I was younger, sharper, trying to prove I belonged in boardrooms and dinner tables I didn't build. But this time, I wasn't behind the smile. I was under it. The toaster clicked. Smoke curled from forgotten bread. The cinnamon in the air turned sharp. They didn't even pause. Syrup spilled. Laughter danced across the room like I hadn't heard what I did, like I hadn't felt it sink in. "More waffles, Grandma?" one of them chirped, not looking up. I nodded, even though my hands had stilled. They kept laughing, and I just stood there. Once, they used to wait for my stories, my songs, my eyes. Now I was furniture. I stared at the oatmeal, stirring in slow circles. Amanda was still talking, plans, errands, something about brunch. I could have stopped her. I could have said, "You don't know what I've done for him, for you, for this whole family." But the words wouldn't come. Not because I'd lost them, because I was tired, the kind of tiredness that sinks in when you realize you're being faded out, on purpose. Outside, the lawnmower groaned to life. Inside, the toast sat cold. I stirred the oatmeal, and I said nothing. James built it with hands that had known work, real work. Not typing or tinkering, but hands that had built fences, carried lumber, repaired roofs. I watched him from the hallway, the glow of the lamp pooling over the cradle's half-finished frame, catching the gray in his hair and the sawdust on his jeans. He didn't say much, just measured twice, cut once. I knew better than to interrupt him. That cradle was his promise, not just to the baby, but to me. When it was done, we moved it into the nursery together. The room was still half empty, just the changing table, a quilt draped over the rocking chair, and now this beautiful thing made of oak. I rested my hand on its edge. It creaked just slightly as it swayed, like it already had a lullaby tucked inside. That night, after we fed her and she finally drifted off, I sat there beside it. The soft scent of baby powder lingered in the air, mixed with a hint of pine. Her tiny breath rose and fell, barely there, but strong. I leaned forward and pressed my cheek to the rim of the cradle, just for a moment, and closed my eyes. It was warm. Not from the wood, but from something deeper. like standing close to a campfire in the middle of the woods, quiet, steady, sacred. I stayed like that longer than I meant to, let the creak of the cradle fill the silence. It was such a small sound, but it settled everything in me. I used to think motherhood was chaos, diapers and schedules and exhaustion. But in that moment, I understood something softer. I wasn't just caring for a child. I was holding the center of something vast. I was the axis, the still point, the home. And as she slept, the shadows on the wallpaper stretched long and slow. The lamp flickered just once and then steadied again. I stayed until my knees ached and the bottle cooled in my hand. But I didn't move. Not yet, because the cradle was rocking. And for once, the whole world felt right. I used to hum while stirring soup. I never thought much of it. Just a quiet tune, something from the church choir or an old lullaby that lived in my bones. But the minute I started, the sound of footsteps would follow, down the stairs, through the screen door, from the far end of the yard. "Smells like Tuesday," James would grin, peeking over my shoulder. "And tastes like comfort," I'd reply, handing him a spoon before he even asked. Back then, the house didn't just fill with people. It was filled with rhythm. My rhythm. I gave birthdays a glow, holidays a heartbeat, even chores for their own music. I'd say things like, "Make the bed like you're making a gift," or "Sweep the dust out like bad moods." And they listened. They really did. At bedtime, they'd curl around my stories like cats in sunbeams. I gave characters silly voices, added drama where there wasn't any, stretched endings just to keep them close a little longer. Even the walls knew me. They held onto my laughter like wallpaper glue. The living room echoed with my scolding and my song. The kitchen counters bore the imprint of my palms. I was everywhere, center and background at once. I remember Amanda once asked, "Grandma, how do you always know what to do?" I looked at her and said, "Because I pay attention. Baby, that's all love really is." She nodded like it was the most profound thing she'd ever heard, and it hit me in that moment how much they counted on me. Not just for food or folded laundry, but for the light in the windows, the welcome in the air. The stew would bubble. The lemon cleaner would linger in the hall, and through the kitchen curtains I'd hear their joy, faint but full. I wasn't just part of this home, I was the music, and when I sang, everyone came closer. The tree lights blinked soft and gold against the windows, and I smoothed one last wrinkle from the tablecloth. Amanda ran by with tinsel in her hair, trailing laughter. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. Hair pinned up, apron dusted with flour, and for the first time in days, I smiled without thinking. "Mama, the extra chairs?" James called from the garage. "In the basement. Check behind the boxes labeled Easter," I shouted back. The house buzzed like a beehive, wrapping paper rustling, kids shrieking over candy canes, the faint clink of my mother's old silver as I laid out each place setting. They needed me for everything. Which fork went where? How long to chill the dough? Whether 8 pies were enough? "Grandma, where's the ribbon with the gold edges?" "Top drawer, right side, next to the peppermint bark." And they'd look at me like I was magic, like I was Christmas. Even the fireplace seemed to wait for my hand to light it. And when the youngest tugged at my sleeve to ask about Santa, I knelt low and whispered the same story I told her daddy years ago. Her eyes sparkled in that firelit way, and for one brief second I saw the thread tying it all together. Me. It all passed through my hands. Every chair, every cookie, every carol. I didn't just host the holiday, I was its heart. The phone used to ring just before dinner, or in the soft hour before bed, sometimes mid-morning while I was folding laundry, always their voices on the other end, full of urgency or joy or worry. "Mom, how do you know when a roast is done without cutting it?" "Grandma, do you think I should go through with the move?" "Do babies sleep better on their sides or their backs?" I had answers. Not always perfect ones, but the kind that settled into their bones like comfort. They asked me about casseroles and colic, breakups and baby names. My words were woven into their lives like thread in a well-loved quilt. "Mama, how did you forgive Dad after that fight?" James once asked, voice small through the receiver. I remember I paused, sat down with a sigh and said, "You forgive someone you love the way you water a plant, daily, even when the sun's not out." He was quiet for a long while. "That helps," he said finally. "That really helps." The recipe card stayed stacked by the tea jar, a little stained, a little wrinkled. But they still called, still asked, and each time something lifted in me, that old familiar joy of being the one who held the map. Who steadied the wheel. I miss that, not because I crave importance, but because it made me feel woven in. Now the phone stays quiet more often, but I still keep the kettle on, just in case. The landline used to ring before I could even finish my first sip of coffee. Sometimes before I even got out of bed. "Mom, I have news." Good or bad, I was always the first call. The voice on the other end would come rushing through, sometimes breathless, sometimes trembling. "He proposed." They said it might be cancer. "I got the job, Mama. Can you believe it?" And I did believe it. I believed in all of them. That phone used to feel like a lifeline, not for them, but for me, because in those calls, I was the anchor, the witness, the keeper of secrets and the sharer of joy. I remember one fall morning, the wind pushing crisp leaves against the window, Amanda called crying. "He left, Grandma. He just left." I pressed the receiver close and said, "You're not alone, sweetheart. I'm right here. Start with breathing." It mattered that they reached for me first. Now the phone sits on its cradle all day sometimes, quiet, waiting. The coffee still steams. The window still opens to the same trees, but I listen for a ring that rarely comes, and when it does, it's not always first. Sometimes it's after the group chat, after the news has already traveled, but I still answer with a soft, "Hello?" and hope in my heart. Because once I was the first voice they needed, and I still keep that space open. I noticed it one morning while reaching for the cinnamon. The little red tin was gone, replaced by something labeled cardamom chai blend. I blinked at it, fingers paused midair. The shelf was different, spices rearranged, labels I didn't recognize, glass jars in place of my old mismatched tins. I stood there for a while, hand resting on the shelf, as if waiting for the kitchen to correct itself. The spring sun warmed my shoulders, the light golden and soft. But inside, I felt a draft. When did they change it? Who decided? I walked to the fridge. The magnets were rearranged, the grandkids' drawings were replaced by chore charts, Amanda's handwriting. Everything labeled, sorted, color-coded, efficient, the fridge humming loudly in the silence. "Did you move the cinnamon?" I asked gently as Amanda passed behind me. "Huh? Oh, I swapped a few things around. Easier flow," she said, not even looking up from her phone. "You'll get used to it." I nodded, slowly, but something in me sagged. Later that afternoon, I opened the pantry. Cans I hadn't bought, cereals I'd never heard of. My old tins were gone completely. I stared at the shelves, lined and stocked but unfamiliar. I wasn't sure what belonged to me anymore. I stood there, fingers resting on the edge of the shelf, trying to remember the last time I chose what went on these shelves. When I made the grocery list. When my voice shaped the room. The light streamed in, still warm, still beautiful. But I didn't feel at home in it. I felt like a guest. I was reaching for the calendar to check on my doctor's appointment. I always kept them written in ink, blue pen, right-hand corner of each square. It was how I kept track. Simple, clear, that's when I saw it. The appointment, crossed out, not erased, not rescheduled, just a single thick line slashed through it, and above it, in someone else's handwriting, Amanda's, a note about a school event for the twins. No one had said anything. No one asked. I stared at the square, heart thudding. Not from anger, but confusion. My name was there, still there, but not in my hand. Just under the calendar hook, her pen lay uncapped. I picked it up. The plastic was still warm. Click, the cap snapped shut. Loud, final, like a door closing in a quiet room. "Did you change my appointment?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Amanda looked up briefly. "Oh, yeah." It conflicted with Jacob's project. "Day, we'll reschedule. Don't worry." She said it like it was nothing, like I was nothing more than another square to be moved around. I set the pen down gently, like it might bruise. The house smelled faintly of ink and lemon cleaner. Familiar, but not comforting. And I thought, for the first time, I'm not driving the rhythm anymore. I'm being managed. I was wiping down the side table in the living room when the drawer stuck slightly. Just a little resistance as I pulled. I gave it a gentle tug, and something inside shifted loose. A letter slid out, sealed, creased, slightly yellowed at the edge. My name, written clearly across the front. I sat down slowly, the paper soft beneath. My fingers. The envelope crinkled faintly, like it knew it wasn't supposed to be found this way. I turned it over, heart already pacing faster than it should. The return address, my clinic, a follow-up notice. Amanda never gave it to me. The spring air drifted in through the window, soft and full of green, but the room felt still, like it was holding its breath with me. I opened the envelope with careful fingers. The letter unfolded smoothly, without resistance. The words were straightforward. A routine checkup, nothing alarming. But it wasn't the contents that made my hands tremble. It was knowing that it had been hidden, not lost, not misplaced. Hidden. I closed my eyes for a moment. I could hear the hum of the fridge, the whisper of trees outside, and beneath it all, the soft rustle of the letter in my lap, like it was apologizing for being late. "Why?" I whispered. Not accusing, just aching. I folded it back and slid it into my apron pocket. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was proof. Something had shifted, and I hadn't been told. They were all gathered around the coffee table, voices overlapping, hands moving in the air with stories and laughter. I sat on the couch beside them, my knitting resting in my lap. I wasn't cold, I didn't speak, I just sat. No one noticed. Amanda was talking about the new after-school program, the others chiming in. I followed the conversation like a stranger eavesdropping on a train. They didn't pause to ask what I thought, didn't check if I remembered that recipe, or that story, or that rule about vinegar and stains. I was right there, and still, I wasn't. Remember the exact moment I realized it. I had become the wallpaper, familiar, always there. But never quite seen. James reached for a throw pillow beside me and didn't even meet my eyes. "Grandma, are you okay?" Sarah asked, finally glancing my way. I smiled. "Of course, sweetheart." But I wasn't. My heart hadn't broken that evening. It had simply sagged, like an old curtain pulled down by years of sunlight and weight. The lavender plug-in near the wall buzzed softly. Too strong, too sweet. The TV murmured something in the background, a sitcom I didn't recognize. Or maybe I just didn't care anymore. I stared at the vase on the coffee table. Fake flowers, always bright, always clean, but never changing, never alive. That's how I felt. Present, but not part of the moment. Just something left in the room. Too long. The laughter rolled down the hallway, light and sharp, like wind chimes in a fast breeze. I sat in the recliner, a warm blanket over my knees, the television flickering soundlessly in front of me. I heard Amanda's voice, something quick and teasing. and then the kids burst out laughing. One of them repeated her joke, the tone almost identical. "She's just slow," I heard one of them say, and then a chorus of giggles. The word pierced through the walls, the same word Amanda used 2 nights ago when I asked a second time where the new broom was. "You're getting slow, Mama," she had said with a chuckle. It had stung then, but now, coming from them, it burned deeper. They didn't mean to be cruel. Kids rarely do, they just echo what they're given, and what they were given was permission. To laugh at me. I waited until the sound faded. Then I reached for the remote, turned the volume up slightly, and smiled when they peeked in. "Everything okay, Grandma?" "Of course," I said, matching their smile. But something inside me shifted. Just slightly, like a tree branch under too much snow. I had once been their storyteller, their hero, their secret keeper. Now they looked to Amanda first, to check, to mimic, to follow. And me? I was a little slower now, but that didn't mean I wasn't still watching or feeling. The silence was sharp now, not soothing like it used to be. I'd step into the hallway and the voices in the kitchen would suddenly lower. A cough, a clatter. Then it was quiet. Too quiet. It wasn't peace. It was avoidance dressed up like calm. I remember one night, I'd gone to bed early, or at least pretended to. But I forgot my glasses on the side table. I eased the door open, walked softly down the hall. Laughter hushed. A whisper. Then nothing, just the soft hum of the dishwasher, the tick of the kitchen clock. I walked in casually, picking up my glasses like I hadn't heard anything. Amanda glanced at me, forced a smile. "You okay?" she asked. "Just grabbing these," I replied, holding up my glasses. She nodded. But her eyes flicked to James, and he didn't return to mine. I took longer than I needed to put the glasses on. The silence wasn't angry. It wasn't icy. It was full, too full, like everyone had agreed on something in my absence, and whatever it was, they didn't want me part of it. The hallway lights stayed dim that night. I walked back to my room slowly. Each step is soft, steady, and small. Silence used to mean rest, a warm house, a finished meal. Now it felt like a closed door. I didn't knock. I just let the quiet hold me, but I no longer trusted its arms. The rain had been falling since late morning, soft and steady. I could hear it tapping gently on the windows, like a kind stranger knocking to say they were thinking of me. I stood in the hallway, still wearing my wool cardigan from my earlier walk to the mailbox. It smelled faintly of damp grass and old wool, familiar and a little lonely. Behind the closed kitchen door, laughter rose, sharp, layered, full. Amanda's voice, James's lower chuckle. Then something about tickets and leaving on Friday. I froze. My hand brushed against the calendar on the wall. I flipped to the next week and saw it written in her handwriting. Trip, Lakeview Inn. No one told me. Not a word. Not a, "Would you like to come?" Or even a, "We'll be gone this weekend." I pressed my palm flat against the cool wall. The coffee scent still lingered from the pot I'd brewed an hour ago, but it had gone cold. Like the space I held in this house. It wasn't the first time. Last month, I found out about Ethan's school play after it had already happened. Amanda said, "Oh, I thought you knew. I posted pictures." But I don't check the pictures. I wait for the conversations. The real ones. I stood there, rain and coffee and silence all wrapped around me. The door stayed closed. The laughter continued, and I thought, when did I stop being part of the plan? When did I become an afterthought? I waited a beat longer, then walked back to the living room. The light was on, but the house still felt dim. The garlic had filled the kitchen earlier, warm and buttery. Now, it lingered in the air like a soft memory. We were all gathered at the table, forks clinking, napkins resting in laps. I smiled when someone cracked a joke, though I hadn't quite caught it. The laughter bounced across the table. Amanda. Leaning into James, the kids giggling at something between them. I tried to chuckle along, I really did, but it felt like my smile was stitched on, pulled too tight. "What's so funny?" I asked softly. "Oh, it's just something from earlier," Amanda waved off. "You had to be there. I was there. I was right there." I set my fork down carefully, the sound sharper than I meant. It tapped against the plate, and suddenly I felt how quiet my own corner of the table was. No one noticed. I pushed the peas around on my plate, nodding along as another round of laughter filled the room. I glanced at Sarah, hoping she'd meet my eyes, but she was busy mimicking Amanda's laugh, almost perfectly. The ache wasn't loud, it was slow, like something rising in my throat that I kept swallowing down. I reached for my water, took a sip, held it in my mouth longer than needed. That dinner ended like most do lately, me clearing the dishes, smiling faintly, heart half full and half forgotten. They laughed, and I smiled, but inside, it was just quiet. My mother used to sit at the end of the table, near the window that stuck in the winter. I remember watching her hands fold napkins, never stopping, always moving. Her voice, though, it vanished the moment the men started talking. She'd hum, a little or nod, maybe refill a cup, but her own stories stayed tucked behind her lips. I used to stare at her, willing her to speak up, to tell them what she told me in the kitchen, to say what mattered. She never did. One day, I whispered, "Mama, why don't you talk?" She looked at me, soft and tired. "They're not listening, baby, so I save my breath for better things." I promised myself I'd never be that kind of quiet. But this morning, I sat at the same kind of table. The wind brushed against the curtains. The lemon polish still clung to the dining chairs, and my hands, now older than hers were then, folded. Napkins with a rhythm I didn't mean to learn. Amanda talked about real estate. James scrolled on his phone. Someone laughed at a video I couldn't see. And me? I folded the last napkin into a triangle and set it down. "I think the chicken's almost ready," I said. No one answered. I looked out the window, the glass fogged a little from the warmth inside. Outside, the garden beds were overgrown, but I could still see the place where Mama used to plant marigolds. I sat where she sat, and for the first time I understood. Maybe I was foolish to think I'd never become invisible. Maybe silence doesn't come all at once. Maybe it's stitched in, one quiet fold at a time. Amanda had just left the room. James, too. The laughter from their exit still hung faintly in the air, like perfume that didn't belong to me. I sat there in the dining chair, hands resting on my knees, eyes on the spot where Amanda had stood when she said it. She's forgetful, but it's cute. Cute, like a pet that missed its cue. She didn't mean it cruelly. Her tone was warm, almost fond, but the words stayed long after she walked out. The fridge hummed steadily behind me. The ceiling fan turned, slow and steady. A few loose pages on the counter fluttered at each pass. I looked down at my hands. They were still steady, still sharp when it mattered. But suddenly I was unsure. Had I forgotten something that morning? Had I asked the same question twice? Was I fading? I sat there longer than I meant to, not out of sadness, not yet, but from wondering. When did I become a thing to be described instead of a person to be included? The silence didn't comfort me. It clung, it whispered, it echoed what I hadn't wanted to hear. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was slipping. I blinked hard, stood slowly, and reached for the list I'd written earlier. Grocery items, reminders, a birthday coming up. Everything was still there. I remembered it all. But the doubt? It had already unpacked itself and taken a seat. The rain came in bursts that night, tapping like memory on the roof. I tucked myself under the quilt. My quilt. The one I'd sewn when Amanda was pregnant, back when fabric stores still smelled like chalk and old paper. Each square told a story, a concert, a road trip, a birth, a goodbye. But tonight, no one asked to hear them. My hands ached, not just stiff, deep, ache right in the bones, the kind that pulsed like it was trying to say something I couldn't translate. I rubbed lavender lotion into my palms, slow and deliberate. The scent was soft, familiar, but it didn't ease the ache. Not really. I curled, tighter under the quilt. The lamp cast a soft golden halo across the faded roses in the fabric. My fingers traced them gently. I used to tell stories as I stitched, out loud sometimes, even if no one was in the room. Now the room stayed quiet. Even when full, warmth used to come from voices, laughter, company. Now it came from heating pads and blankets. The quilt covered me fully, but I still felt cold in places the fabric couldn't reach. I closed my eyes and listened to the house breathe, the creaks, the faint hum of something I couldn't name. I used to be part of that breath. Now, I just listened from under the quilt. Have you ever felt this way? Like you're surrounded, but unseen? Like you could disappear quietly, and nothing in the room would change? I used to fill this home, with stories, with music, with scents from the kitchen that meant something. Now, I sit in the quiet between their plans, their jokes, their noise. And I wonder, have I become part of the furniture? Have you? Because if you have, I see you. I really do. The roast smelled just right. Crisp edges, rosemary clinging to the juices. I'd cooked it the same way for years, and the scent still warmed the corners of the kitchen. But tonight, it felt like a blanket stretched too, tight, like it was trying to cover something that didn't want to be covered. The oak table groaned gently under the weight of the meal, the kind of sound that usually made me smile. Tonight, it echoed. Plates were full, but the forks moved slowly. Amanda poured wine without asking who wanted it. James sat straighter than usual. The grandkids whispered, giggled, and stopped when no one joined in. I folded my napkins slowly. My fingers trembled a bit, so I kept them under the table, letting them rest against my knee to steady. No one spoke for a long time, just the quiet clink of silverware, the creak of an old chair, someone clearing their throat. I looked around the geek table, really looked. Their eyes darted from plate to plate, never quite meeting mine. They knew something was coming. Maybe not what. But they felt it, the same way I did. Amanda cut her meat too carefully. Her knife scraped against porcelain, a sound too loud for the moment. She didn't apologize. "Everything tastes good, Grandma," Sarah offered, voice small. "Thank you, sweetheart," I replied gently. I waited. Not for permission, not anymore. Just for the moment to land. I inhaled deeply. The scent of roast and rosemary filled my lungs, but I barely tasted it. I touched the envelope in my lap, and I knew it was time. I held the envelope in both hands, the way you hold something that matters. My fingers were steady now. My voice, when I spoke, surprised even me. Clear, calm. "Amanda," I said, "would you please read my will aloud?" Forks paused mid-air. A spoon clinked back into a bowl. No one moved right away. Even the grandkids stopped whispering. Amanda's eyes widened just slightly. "Now?" she asked. "Yes. Now." I slid the envelope across the table toward her. It caught on the cloth for a second before she picked it up. Her fingers hesitated at the seal. No one else spoke. Even the air seemed to wait. She unfolded the pages with slow, deliberate care. The rustle of paper sounded louder than it should. Have in a room so full of unspoken things. And as she began, the power shifted. Quietly but completely. Amanda's voice wavered at first. Just enough to hear it. The paper in her hands shook a little. Or maybe it was the candlelight casting shadows where I didn't expect them. "My estate," she read, will be divided among my grandchildren, with love and with the hope that they carry forward the care I once carried for them. A pause, a flicker of emotion across her face. To Amanda and James, thank you for what you've done. This part of the journey has been complicated, and I hope this final clarity brings peace rather than pain. The room didn't breathe. Even the youngest sat still, their forks untouched beside cooling potatoes. Then came the boundaries, the notes I'd carefully chosen. Specifics, conditions. What I was willing to give and what I no longer had room to absorb. Not cruelty, not bitterness, just the truth. Measured, thoughtful truth. Amanda's voice tightened. I ask that no decisions be made on my behalf without my involvement. I remain capable. I will remain here. A tremor ran through the table, not from the wood, but from the people sitting around it. She finished reading, folded the paper, and still, no one spoke. But I felt it, the shift. The room no longer saw a woman being carried by the current. They saw the one holding the oar. I reached for my glass of water, my hand slow but sure. Amanda was still holding the paper. Her eyes were fixed on the folded edges, but I could feel her watching me from beneath her lashes. I cleared my throat gently. The room was quiet, thick with a kind of stillness that asked to be broken. I'm not gone yet, I said softly. Not loud, not angry, just real. Amanda looked up then, really looked. And I met her eyes, steady and full. The rest of the room stayed frozen, like the sentence had locked them in place. I let the silence stretch, a moment longer. Then I smiled, just barely. I'm still here, I added, and I still know what's best for me. The fridge hummed in the background. A chair creaked. The clock ticked behind us, marking a moment that would be hard to forget. Amanda nodded. Once, but didn't speak. She didn't need to. I leaned forward just a little, both palms resting gently on the table's edge. The paper still lay between us like a final word, but I had one more to give. You don't get to narrate my decline, I said to Amanda, my voice even, not bitter, not hurtful, just true. She blinked, startled not by the words, but by the weight they carried. I saw James glance at her, then at me. Sarah leaned back in her chair slowly. The youngest shifted, their feet brushing against the legs of the table. No one spoke, but something shifted. I wasn't asking to be seen anymore. Was stating that I already was. Amanda opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it. She nodded slowly, her shoulders dipping just slightly. Not in shame, but in recognition. I looked around the table, my eyes landing on each of them. I've lived long enough to know when my voice is being rewritten, I continued. And I'm choosing to write it myself. The candle between us flickered, casting light onto the edges of my plate, the folds in the tablecloth. They didn't applaud. They didn't argue. They listened, and I felt the kind of silence that comes after something important. The meal had ended, but no one moved right away. Forks rested on empty plates, glasses half full, the casserole dish still sat at the center, growing colder by the minute. But I wasn't cold. I was steady. No one spoke, not because they didn't know what to say, but because for once they knew not to interrupt the moment. The kitchen light buzzed softly above us. Outside, the street. Lamps flickered to life. Inside, something gentler settled in. I leaned back in my chair. My back ached, but my chest felt light. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be dismissed. I was heard. Amanda reached for her glass. Her fingers wrapped around it slowly, not like she needed a drink, but like she needed something to hold on to. James cleared his throat. You said that well, Ma. I gave a small smile. I've been holding on to it for a while. A car passed outside, its headlights slicing briefly across the window. I looked around the room one more time. Not everyone understood everything I'd said, but they understood this much. I was still here, still whole, still mine. The soil was still, damp from last night's rain, and when I stepped outside, it greeted me like an old friend. That deep, rich scent of earth, like something ready to hold you without judgment. I pulled my sweater tighter around my shoulders. The morning was cool, but not cold, just crisp enough to remind me spring was still stretching its legs. I made my way toward the garden bed, boots pressing into the softened ground. The tulip bulbs I'd planted months ago were finally starting to show. Tiny green shoots poked through the soil, timid but certain. I knelt beside them, letting my fingers rest near the base of one sprout, careful not to touch, just close enough to feel the cool air swirl between my palm and the earth. Healing feels like that sometimes. Not loud, not showy, just slow and quiet and steady. I used to think things had to break all the way before they could start to mend. But the tulips reminded me that growth doesn't wait for permission. It just keeps reaching. Even when the world gets cold, even when no one's watching. The bird calls were soft in the trees, like someone whispering a lullaby just for me. I sat back on my heels, taking in the uneven rows, the little signs of life pressing upward from the darkness. There was peace here. Not the kind that comes from fixing everything, but the kind that arrives when you stop trying so hard to rush the bloom. Sometimes, all you can do is kneel in the dirt and be patient. The sun was already warming the grass when they came bounding out. Sarah first, her little boots 2 sizes too big, followed by Ethan, dragging the tiny wheelbarrow I'd kept from when Amanda was small. "Grandma, can we plant the purple ones today?" Sarah asked, already digging through the seed packets like treasure. I smiled. "Only if you promise to whisper something nice to them while you plant." "Like what?" "Like you're doing great," I said. She nodded seriously, then knelt in the soil, her tiny hands making soft dents as she pressed a tulip bulb into place. Ethan followed suit, humming a tune that sounded like sunshine. Their laughter floated up with the morning breeze, mixing with the bird song and the rustle of leaves overhead. The air smelled like sunscreen, soil, and something hopeful. I watched them closely, not just the way they moved, but the way they focused. They weren't rushing, they weren't fighting, they were simply present. There was something healing in that. Watching them, I realized respect isn't taught in lectures. It grows here, in dirt and kindness and time, and I thought, maybe some roots take a while, but if you water them with enough joy, they bloom just fine. She stood at the edge of the porch, hands wrapped around her coffee mug, eyes focused somewhere beyond us. Amanda hadn't stepped off the porch since we started. The kids didn't notice. They were too busy building their kingdom in the garden bed, 2 inches of soil and endless imagination. But I noticed. I didn't call her over. I didn't wave, I just let her be. There was a time I might have said something. Pushed, invited, asked her to take a trowel and join us just for a minute. But now I understood. Some things don't grow faster when you pull at them. She took a sip of coffee, then tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. We locked eyes for half a second, just long enough for a quiet exchange to pass between us. Not apology, not blame, just space. The lilacs were blooming behind her. Their scent drifted toward the porch, soft and sweet. The breeze tugged at her sweater. I turned back to the kids, watching Sarah cover a bulb with too much dirt and pat it proudly. "Perfect," I whispered. Amanda sat down slowly in the rocking chair. She didn't speak, just rocked. And for now, that was enough. I pressed my hands into the dirt, fingers sinking through the cool top layer. Moist, soft, almost alive. The kind of soil that gives back when you treat it right. The green tips were just beginning to break through. Tulips. I recognized their shape even in this early stage, tight, curved, pushing upward with quiet determination. I paused and stared at them. They didn't rush. They didn't bloom all at once. They just reached, stubborn and soft at the same time. I let my hand rest flat against the ground beside them. There's something humbling about watching life return like that. Not because you told it to, but because it never stopped trying. Respect feels like that. It lies low for a while. Beneath arguments, beneath forgetfulness, even beneath love that's worn thin. But give it light, a little warmth, a little room. And one day it rises. Not for show, just to say, I'm still here. A bee buzzed nearby. I didn't flinch. I stayed still, listening to the hum, the world soft around me. I looked. Over my shoulder. No one was watching. No one needed to. This moment wasn't for them. It was for me, and for the tulips who dared to bloom through darkness. I sat on the garden bench, the sun leaning lower now, casting long lines through the lavender. There was something quiet settling in my chest, not silence, peace. I looked down at my hands, lined, worn, capable. I pressed my palm into my thigh and exhaled. Dignity, I'd come to realize, isn't something you wait to be handed. It's something you grow. You water it with patience. You pull the weeds of shame. You prune the things that no longer bloom. You stop asking for people to notice, and instead, you notice yourself. I reached down and tugged a tiny weed from beside the basil, tossed it aside gently. The soil was still warm, and so was I. Some things take root quietly, like forgiveness, like dignity. If this story reminded you of your own garden, your own quiet bloom, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if these moments feel familiar, you're always welcome to sit with me again. Just subscribe and stay a while.